Hello, everyone, and welcome again for another career and spirituality conversation. So, for those of you who have never listened to the podcast, I'm Julie Pone, your host, and I support spiritual seekers having a career experience to reconcile what they do for a living with who they are as a soul. And today, to help me out, to inspire you, I'm delighted to have Rosemary Loughlin. Rosemary, how are you, Rosemary?
I'm great, Julie. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm super excited for this conversation because it's not every day that I get to interview someone who's like so interestingly married, like career and passion and spirituality. So I'm gonna spoil it before before we do the grounding, but because you're not only a lawyer but an actor and a writer. So that's going to be super interesting to disentangle. But before we start and I start grilling you with questions, we're going to have like a 1-2 minutes just breathing together to be really present, listening to us. So on these words, let's make ourselves comfortable and close our eyes. And focusing on the weight of our bodies, where we're sitting, grounding ourselves, noticing the weight of our feet on the ground, anchoring our feet into the ground, connecting with the earth, and then allowing our attention, our focus to move back up all the way into our chest and into our hearts. Tuning into the sensations or the sounds of our hearts beating in our chest. Imagining for a moment as if our breath is flowing in and out directly through our hearts. And just breathing a little bit slower and deeper than we usually do for about a minute in silence. And one more deep, slow breath. Before slowly opening our eyes again. And ta-da, welcome back.
That was so nice.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here, Rosemary. I really appreciate it in the middle of your workday.
A pleasure, Julie.
So we met recently, and I was astonished to discover that alongside your career as a lawyer, you're not only passionate about Shakespeare, but you've also lived that passion fully to actually becoming an actor, playing on stage, but also researching the history of Shakespeare and that very, is it controversial point about the authorship and like who really wrote Shakespeare or who is he really. So there's a lot that we're going to learn from you about all of this. And before we start, I would love to first ask you about where you stand on the spiritual spectrum, so to speak. What does it mean to you? Like maybe what's your current spiritual perspective and has it changed over time?
Well, I would consider that I'm on a spiritual journey.
Mhm.
I would consider that we are all on a spiritual journey, whether we realize it or not. What is a spiritual journey? I think it involves going inwards and facing up to a lot of uncomfortable things within ourselves. The word spiritual on its own, I think it doesn't mean very much. It's almost a little bit fluffy. Sometimes you see, for
Mhm.
example, on questionnaires, if you have to describe yourself, there could be various religions put forward, like
Mm.
Protestant, Catholic, and if you're not ticking that box, you might tick the box spiritual. To me, that doesn't really say much apart from the fact that one thinks that perhaps there is some greater power out there that influences things. I would consider the concept of a greater power as God, as the ultimate supreme creator. Whereas for me, the concept of spirituality in itself, I think, is going inwards. It is looking at the parts of ourselves that we don't want to look at,
Mhm.
looking at the shadows, and being very aware as to our patterns, and then finding a version of ourselves that is unique, that is true to ourselves, and we're offering that then into the world. And thinking as well about the context in which the word spiritual is used. As I said, I see it in the context of a spiritual journey.
Mhm.
Sometimes we hear about spiritual bypassing, and I
Yeah.
think that's very interesting because for me, spiritual bypassing is one is trying to make the advancement that one wants, but one isn't going fully into the mire and the rough edges that one needs to fully address in order to make that jump, that leap that one wants to. So I think with the concept of spirituality, we must always look at it in the context of what are we talking about? Is it a spiritual journey, spiritual bypassing? The word spiritual itself is very wide and could mean an awful lot.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, that's true. That's true. Like, we it's nearly fashionable somehow. Yeah. So the first, I think it's important to know where one stands and what it means, to us. But I really like in your answer the double perspective. Like it's not just going, yes, it's going inwards, but it's also drawing something out that we are expressing outwards.
Absolutely. And it is recognizing the interconnectedness of all beings and of all of nature.
Yeah. Yeah. And so how did you grow up like in an environment that already had that type of perspective, or was it more from a religious background? Like how have you evolved to have that I would say expanded and quite down to earth actually, like a perspective on spirituality?
Well, I grew up in a traditional Irish Catholic background. And my aunt, in fact, Sheila, she was a nun.
Yeah.
And she had a great love of France, in fact.
Hmm.
She went to Paris, she did her PhD on Albert Camus, and she traveled a lot, and she always used to bring us back these beautiful stories, noticing the finer details of every place that she traveled to and the people there. And it was really good for me to see somebody who was a nun. She's passed away now, but she was a nun, so she would have been very much within these strictures that she had to conform to, but yet she had this incredible ability to live in the moment.
Yeah.
And I think being exposed to that really helped my own understanding of how beautiful life can be. And I think, again, that's part of the spiritual journey for me, is stopping and looking and really seeing. And the simplest things have such depths to them. And I think I learned a lot of that from my aunt.
Mm. Yeah, that's fantastic. And so that, like, did she communicate her love of France to you?
She did, she absolutely did. And she used to love the French, the way they were very mannerly. And
Yeah.
one of her expressions was toujours la politesse.
Oh,
And
wow.
she really found that in French
Yeah.
people, that they were always so polite. And when she was in our house, if there was ever a bit of people maybe giving their opinion in a way that wasn't considerate, she would always interject with toujours la politesse.
Ah, that's so funny. Well, thank you. Like as a French representative, I appreciate her perspective. I'm not sure that we're always so polite, but
And
yeah.
funnily enough, one of the other things that she loved about France, and I
Yeah.
learned this as well when I went to France as a teenager, the love of food.
Ah,
I had a great love of food as a child.
yeah.
And when I went to France, there was so much ceremony around food and people talking about food and where it came from, its provenance, the flavors. That's one of the wonderful thing about French people is their culture. They take time as well to have their lunch. They're not eating al desco as a lot of us are here in Ireland and the UK.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's true. Like, I got to admit, I got over that. Now, like, when I go home and like we take so much time to eat, I'm like, ah, when is it over yet? Yeah, that's funny. And what about your like your career trajectory? So like, so I know you're a lawyer, but how did you come about choosing this career? Can you tell us a little bit about that? Was it already something you wanted to do, or did you sort of kind of find yourself sort of having to pick something?
I was one of these people, Julie, who was really feeling my way around. When I finished the Leaving Cert, I had applied on what's known as the CAO form, where we applied to go to college. I put down law as my first choice, and I did it not out of any huge desire to become a lawyer,
Mhm.
but because I had the option within law to study a language. I loved languages at school, so I did law and German. And I felt that it would be a very good basic education and that I could then decide after the degree what I'd like to do. So I didn't go into the degree thinking I want to become a solicitor, which is in fact what I ended up becoming in the end. So it was interesting. I remember some of my classmates, they went into the course knowing exactly that they wanted to be a solicitor at the end of it. So I took a more winding route. I did my law degree, then I did a little a 1 year diploma after it, also in law. And I went to uh, the Michael Smurfit Business School to do what was called a DBS, a Diploma in Business Studies. And
Yeah.
after that, I ended up in Belgium for 2 years, where I worked as a translator
Mhm.
of documents and also as a paralegal in a law firm and as a stagiaire in the European Commission. After that, then I found a niche within law that I really enjoyed, which was an area called competition law. They call it
Okay.
antitrust in America. And it's to do with companies, the rules that apply to companies competing with each other. And if you have a very large company, that's known as a dominant position, and the rules as to what they can and cannot do. So I decided then to qualify as a solicitor
Mhm.
and to try and get into the area of competition law, which I did. I worked in that area for nearly 5 years after qualifying as a solicitor. And yeah, so very much a roundabout way
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
ending up as a solicitor.
Yeah. So it wasn't your calling from the start, so to speak, but listening to you, it sounds like you're one step after another. You followed clues of things that seemed to be like that you had an interest in. So you sort of always follow the thread of
Yes,
um, of things that were like piquing your interests or something like that, right?
exactly. So I would follow my curiosity and engage with a new area, and then somehow that would end up becoming part of my life.
Yeah. So that's interesting because, like, from the very little that I know about you, it sounds like this curiosity has also led you on a very different, like, on a parallel path with Shakespeare. Can you tell us the story? How did you end up becoming an actor
In
and a
again, in
researcher? Sorry,
a
and a
very
researcher.
well, in a very roundabout way, really, Julie. So when I was around 30 years of age, I I took some acting classes, introduction to acting. I'd never acted before, although I do remember a wonderful period in primary school where we had an improvisation class, and it was electrifying, and that always sat with me. So I took up an introduction to acting class at the Gaiety School of Acting, and I loved it. I made lots of friends,
Yeah.
really enjoyed the playfulness, and loved looking at scripts and breaking them down. And I continued doing more and more courses, and I ended up joining an amateur dramatic group as well. And what happened then around 2008, I had left my role in competition law and I had joined an organization, and the new role didn't work out. And I became, for the first time in my life, in a position where I had no income. I was unemployed, and I knew I would get something else, but obviously it takes a bit of time. And during the time when I was applying for jobs, I said, I'm really going to work on the acting as well. So I started doing a lot of voice work. I went to a lady who helped me with my voice, and I fortuitously attended a production of Julius Caesar by William Shakespeare. And it was the last night of the performance, and it was one of the most magnificent performances I've ever seen. It was so well done, and it was a tiny production. It was in a very small space. And this was a play that I had studied in school, so I was familiar with it already. And I think that really helps when you're looking at Shakespeare, because the language can be quite difficult. But when I looked at the program note for the play, it mentioned that the director gave classes in classical acting. So I signed up, and for 8 years, I attended on and off, I attended weekly classes in learning to perform Shakespeare. So each class every week would be 3 hours in length. The first hour would be physical and vocal warm-up. Then we would have 2 hours of each person in the class would perform their monologue, and our brilliant teacher, Andy Hines, would direct us through our monologue, give us his instructions on how it could be improved, etc., etc. And I became deeply immersed in this. I knew I loved Shakespeare, but I found it very difficult to act. I found it a lot more difficult to act Shakespeare than to act more modern texts.
Is
And
it because of the like the I know, so it's like older English, like the pronunciation itself of the words, or what made it more difficult?
it wasn't so much the pronunciation of the words. It is because there's a slightly different way. There's a different way in acting Shakespeare than in more modern texts.
Okay.
So in more modern texts, a lot of what the actor is doing is not in the words. So for example, if you have a modern play and the husband comes in the door and says to the wife, hello, honey, I'm home, how are you? And she says, I'm fine. She could have a whole load of things going on. You can say, I'm fine in so many different ways. She could say, I'm fine. Or she could say, I'm fine, because she's thrilled to see him. So much of what is behind the words is in the body. And it's not really the words themselves that are as important. Whereas in Shakespeare, the thought is on the line. So everything you're saying in Shakespeare is exactly as the line requires it. And that requires a certain alignment. And for whatever reason, when I was studying Shakespeare at that time, the words were coming out of my mouth. They were all being pronounced correctly. I had the speeches off by heart, but the physical connection between me and the lines wasn't there. It took a while, and I had a breakthrough moment. I'd say I was doing the class for about 9 months before I had the breakthrough, and it was when I was studying one of the male speeches, and I think that gave a certain release. I wasn't trying to be a Lady Macbeth or a Queen Margaret, one of these famous Shakespearean female roles that we all have heard of. I was playing a male, and I'm not going to play a male when I normally go on stage. So I think it freed up something. So I had my breakthrough moment when I did, in fact, a speech from Julius Caesar, "Oh, pardon me, thou bleeding piece of earth" by Mark Antony. So as I say, Julie, because I became deeply immersed in these texts, and I developed a real curiosity about this author. I could see his wisdom, the profundity, the experience, the knowledge. And in the back of my mind, I knew that whoever this person was, they were brilliant on many levels. Not only did they have genius, but they also had a vast range of experience and education, because the Greek and Latin references, the author could speak French, highly knowledgeable about Italy, about courtly affairs. Nearly all the plays are set in courtly settings. So this person was very immersed in life at court. So all of that was in the back of my head while I was studying these texts. But I just assumed, like everyone does, I didn't have any reason to doubt that the author was not William Shakespeare from Stratford-upon-Avon. The reason I say Shakespeare is that the man from Stratford-upon-Avon, he never spelled his name the way Shakespeare is spelled, which is Shakespare. He used to spell it Shakspere. So it was a flat, a Shakespeare. And then one night in 2012, I watched a documentary on Sky Arts, and it was about Shakespeare. So I was like, great, this is about Shakespeare. And it was about the authorship question. And this was my first time becoming aware that there was a question, that there was a doubt, and that some people were saying that William from Stratford-upon-Avon was not the author. So I sat down and I watched this documentary, and it was eye-opening. And it was like everything that I had learned about Shakespeare to date was reconciling with what I was seeing on the screen, which was telling me that the author was not William, that the author was highly educated, and that the author was very likely to be Edward de Vere, the Earl of Oxford. So that really took me on my Shakespeare journey. And again, that went down lots of meandering pathways, a bit like everything else in my life, and brought me to places that were completely unexpected.
So at that moment in time when you're looking at that documentary, and somehow listening to you, it sounds like suddenly it's like something an alignment happened between what you could feel inside and something that wasn't making total sense so far, and then suddenly you get a piece of the puzzle that's like, yes. So what happens? Do you make a conscious decision then that, oh my God, like, I need to know more, I'm going to go into a full-on investigation, or what happened? Or then, like, one step after another, you just again ended up following like a path towards you didn't know where at the time?
Yeah, so as you described, I think alignment is a very good way of describing it, and it was like a light bulb moment.
Yeah.
So I started researching online, and I saw that there was a society in the UK, the De Vere Society, and that this society advocated for Edward de Vere, Earl of Oxford, as Shakespeare. So I looked at their newsletter and articles on their website. I then purchased some books online. So I slowly started my research.
Mm.
And the more I researched, the more drawn into it that I was. So I ended up signing up as a member to the De Vere Society. And I also signed up to the organization in America which advocates for Edward de Vere, which is the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship. And I read a lot of books, and I became very convinced for the evidence that convinced about the evidence that Edward de Vere is Shakespeare. It was very compelling to me. And what I discovered was that there are a lot of lawyers who are in fact Oxfordians. The expression Oxfordian, let me explain, is a person who advocates for Edward de Vere, Earl of Oxford.
Mm.
And the reason that a lot of lawyers have become Oxfordians is because when you're trained in the law, you have a particular way of thinking.
Mm.
And I find this very much in my own job. I'm not practicing. I work in the capacity of a legislative drafter, which is drafting legislations, drafting regulations and bills. But if I'm, for example, drafting regulations, I always have to go back to the source. So the Act would tell me what power the minister has, what can go into the regulations. I also have to look at other things. I might have to look at the Constitution. I'm always going back. I never take anything for face value. I'm always going behind it to see, is this allowed? Is this permitted? Is this legal?
Mm.
So I think that when you have that way of thinking, if you're presented with William from Stratford being the author, you say to yourself, okay, well, what kind of a life did he have? Where did he go to school? Did he get the education required to write the great works of Shakespeare? And I found that the legal education was actually incredibly useful for investigating and going down the rabbit hole of the Shakespeare authorship question.
And so what, like from there, like when were you actually like fully satisfied with what you'd found, and what did you do with it?
So I became pretty convinced as to the evidence early on. I'd say it took me a couple of months of reading.
Okay.
And I also looked at, there are other candidates as well, Christopher Marlowe, Francis Bacon, the Earl of Derby, and none of those were convincing in any way to me. They all had elements that would make them more convincing than the man from Stratford, because they were all educated, they were able to, they were known writers, whereas the man from Stratford, we don't have anything left in his own hand. And we're told that he went to the grammar school in Stratford upon Avon, but there's no records for the school to show that that was the case. And sorry, what was your question again, Julie? I've just lost my train of.
Yeah. When were you actually like definitively satisfied with the answers that you'd found? And then what was the next step? What did you do with it? Because you could have just said like, oh, okay, well now I'm personally convinced of this, and then carry on with your life. But that's not really what happened, is it?
Yes, exactly. And just to before I to answer that as well, I think that it's important for me to say the reason I was convinced, and the reason that, say, the Earl of Oxford for me was the compelling candidate, it was to do with his education. he was privately educated from a very young age. He was intense, he had a very intense regimen, and he is known to have read books that are key sources of Shakespeare's plays. Other reasons are he writes about, in the plays, Shakespeare writes about various persons that various characters that are modeled on real life persons. So, for example, Polonius in the play Hamlet is modeled on Lord Burleigh, who was Edward de Vere's father-in-law. Edward de Vere also then travelled to Italy and is known to have visited the places that are mentioned in Shakespeare's plays. So these are just some of the reasons why I became convinced for Edward de Vere. It was the holistic, everything about him, everything in his life was reflected in the plays. And what happened then, Julie, was I was reading all around me and loving reading it, but I knew at some level that I had to take the next step. And for me, the next step, I love traveling, and I wanted to visit the places where Edward de Vere lived, where he was born, where he died, where he worked in, where he traveled to, because I've always loved not only traveling, but getting a sense physically of being in the same place where a historical figure, somebody I might admire, would have been. And I think a lot of us, we love that. We love visiting a castle where a famous king lived, or going to the house of a writer. And that's why it's so important, I think, to preserve the residences of our famous historical writers. But so I embarked on travels myself, beginning in 2015. I first went to the UK, to London, to where he lived. He lived in the house of William Cecil, his father-in-law. I travelled outside of London then, well, within London, but outside the centre, to Hackney, where he died. And I visited Hedingham Castle, where he was born. That's in near Cambridge. And then I travelled to Italy. I went to Verona, Padua, Mantua, Venice, and very fortunately, there are other Oxfordians who have now passed, and they did extensive research on the Italian connections in Shakespeare's plays. So I went to Italy armed with their books, and I had my research hat on. And what I expected when I went to Italy, I expected that I would have a lovely time visiting Venice and Mantua and looking at the books written by Oxfordians and thinking, oh, this is lovely. But what happened, Julie, was that I ended up having my own adventures, completely unexpected adventures, and making my own discoveries. And for example, one of the discoveries I made was that in the play The Merchant of Venice by Shakespeare, we learned that the principal character, Portia, lives in a place called Belmont. Now, the research of Oxfordians has shown that Belmont is a place, a real life villa called Villa Foscari. And the reason they were able to discover this was that they looked at the clues in the play that would show where Belmont is located geographically, and looking at those coordinates, they came up with Villa Foscari. Now, for whatever reason, they hadn't themselves visited Villa Foscari. I visited Villa Foscari, and I couldn't believe on the walls there was a painting done in 1569, which would have been 5 years before Edward de Vere travelled to Italy. And it was a painting of a woman called Portia. And it was a painting of the Roman Portia, the Portia who was Brutus's wife.
Okay.
So what I realized was that Shakespeare, Edward de Vere, he would have visited this villa in Italy. He would have seen the portrait of the Roman Portia, who's a real life person. She was the wife of the wife of Brutus in the play Julius Caesar. And then he would have worked in the location of Villa Foscari into The Merchant of Venice, and then called the principal character Portia, linking it back to the Portia he saw on the wall. So I was quite astounded by this, and it was wonderful to be able to present this to the Oxfordian community and say, you know, here's just another reason why we think Edward de Vere is Shakespeare. So what I ended up doing, that was one adventure. There were other adventures as well. And I realized
It's like a literature archaeology.
absolutely. Do you know a good way I think sometimes of describing it? It's a little bit like, you know, Dan Brown's book, The Da Vinci Code.
Oh yes.
Yeah. Now it's not quite as high stakes as that, but I could really relate to, you know, those. You're looking at things that happened centuries ago, and you're putting the pieces together, and you're looking at what has been buried and hidden and not talked about. So I ended up then writing a one-woman show all about my adventures, and I
Can we stop for a second about just like, you know, never mind that you know, you read all the books and traveled all those places, but you know, like just noticing how casually you just mentioned, oh yeah, and I just so happened that I wrote a one-woman show. Hello, this is, you know, like this is big.
well, yeah, it is, Julie, because I suppose now that it's done and dusted, I can kind of say, oh, I wrote a one-woman show. But if you had said to me 6 years ago, Rosemary, you're going to write a one-woman show and you're going to put it on in the Edinburgh Festival and in London and in Smock Alley Theatre in Dublin, I would have laughed at you. I would have said, Julie, there is no way I can write a one-woman show and perform it and produce it. And that's what happened. And it was all tiny steps along the way, doing tiny things. For example, during COVID, I would get up in the morning and I would spend 15 minutes writing. And I might only write a sentence. But by doing those tiny little bits every day, what happens is that the imagination is fired up. And I would often find then that when I would go to bed at night, I might wake up in the middle of the night and I would be thinking about it. And I might get ideas and avenues and ways of writing. A sentence might pop into my head in the middle of the night. And I'd always have my notebook next to me. To jot it down. So it all happened very, very slowly. So it's amazing what you can do when you take things one step at a time.
Yes, yes, the one step at a time. But also the way you describe it, because you know, when you know, and you work of writing in my head, in my mind, you know, like would imply sitting down and thinking about the structure and a lot of work and you know a lot of burning neurons, so to speak. But the way you describe it, somehow it nearly feels like tapping into into creativity, like a real creative process that is less relies on the I don't want to say the intellect, that's not the right word, but on the analytical mind, and more was about allowing the information, the phrases, like to come to you. Is that like, you know, am I on the right track here? Or
Yes, because when I was doing, say, my 15 minutes writing in the morning, I would know that I wasn't going to get the finished draft. And I would know that what's going on the page initially is going to be very rough and almost childlike. For example, I'd be saying, I went here and then I saw that and then this happened and then that happened. And it's all very rather immature writing. But by getting it out on the page first, there was something to work at. And when there's something on the page, it's amazing. It's almost like that's planted then into the brain, and higher levels can be achieved, because during the day you might be reading another piece of text and you come across a word and you think, actually, that's the perfect word now to describe my situation as well. So once you start, even at the most basic level, something is worked on in the brain that causes us to look to be inspired by anything in the outer world or inner world that would build upon that.
Yeah. It feels like really opening up like the pathway for like, you know, your inner world to communicate with the outer world, like that constant exchange of information and basically making sparks. Yeah.
Mm.
And I love how you describe that whole process, you know, that's again, it's like one little step at a time, the same way your whole research was a little step at a time, and the way, like, you know, your career was a little step at a time. And like, how does all of this intertwine, and also intertwine with, like, you know, your perspective on spirituality? And I know you know, we chatted a little bit, you know, before, and how like your journey with Shakespeare like really helped your spiritual journey. How can you talk to us about that?
Yes, well, I would consider my Shakespeare journey as a spiritual journey.
Yeah.
And there were so many unexpected, delightful things that happened along the way that I never would have thought possible. So many beautiful coincidences, synchronicities that happened, that I write about in the play. It was almost as if at some level the universe was helping me along
Mhm.
and helping me with these discoveries. It wanted me to go on this journey. It wanted me to make these discoveries. And the exciting, beautiful occasions always happened when I completely let go control, when I had no fixed outcome in my head, when I just relaxed into it. And that was what allowed the space for the magic moments to happen. And I think that this is very linked into my spiritual journey, or the whole concept of spirituality, because I do think spirituality involves letting go. And as I said at the start about going, really seeing, so going inwards, noticing what's happening within ourselves, but also noticing what is happening outside of us. So when I went to Italy and England, and to those places where Edward de Vere lived and traveled to, I really had my seeing hat on. I was so grateful just to be present in this place, and the gratitude that I felt and the appreciation for being on this journey allowed me to see things that maybe if I wasn't in that space of discovery and gratitude, that I might just walk past.
Yeah. And sorry to interrupt, because right here and there, it's nearly like the legacy of your aunt, that
Yes.
love for.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So in some way, I'm really seeing now in the way that she did when she went to those faraway places. That's a very good point, Julie.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And also when you said, like, you know, because you said the important thing, you said like letting go of control, being detached from the outcome, being present, like the parallel between the inner, you know, the like that we said with spirituality, going inwards, but also expressing, looking outwards. And it's like the difference between you and like maybe many of the other Oxfordians is like they only looked inwards, as in they only looked like inside the work of Shakespeare, but they never bothered to look outwards in the environment that he'd been in. So, but in a way, like you've done both, you've looked inside his work very deeply, but you also went and looked at
Mm.
like at the you know, like outside, like the environment that he was in. That's
Well,
exactly what you describe for your spiritual journey as well.
um, yes. Now, with respect to the Oxfordians who have done the research on Italy, they one of them was Italian and the other was American, who actually traveled to Italy and was seeing everything.
Okay.
But
Gotcha.
for example, my thinking is that the reason neither of them saw the picture of Portia in Villa Foscari is that it has quite limited opening hours. It certainly had the time I visited. I think it might be open every day now, but it was only open 2 days a week. So I think that the reason that that was missed is not because anyone it just walk past, but literally because that building is not the most accessible. So that was, I felt in a very lucky position actually, Julie, to live in Ireland, because for me it's a short flight to Italy. There are a lot of Oxfordians in America, and for that cross-Atlantic travel, it's a big deal coming to Italy. So, but what I hope with the journey that I've been on with Shakespeare, there's been the academic element to it, but also the getting out there and really investigating more about the author, more about the places that he visited, and also having great fun. I had great fun a lot at the time. You know, I'd go to Venice and I would visit a lot of churches because I love visiting churches. I find them very peaceful. And I'd be thinking, oh, I wonder, did Edward de Vere visit this church when he came here in 1575? And I would wander around the street, soaking up the atmosphere, you know, have an ice cream, have a glass of Prosecco, all of that. So I think that that's really important as well when we are involved in really kind of possibly challenging subject areas, you know, proving that Shakespeare was Edward de Vere, that we also have fun and make time for ourselves along the way to enjoy the journey.
I love that because, like, you know, like like you're mapping out like important like aspects, like, yeah, like I said, like letting go of control, being detached from the outcome, being present, grateful in the
Mm,
moment, and having fun. It's
mm,
like, I mean, like, you know, we're into like a great personal development pointers here, right there and then.
mm, indeed.
And there's like how does that all intertwine with your legal career? Because I know you shared basically how maybe how did that inform maybe the choices that you've made in your yeah, in your career as a lawyer?
So as I say, I work as a drafter, and it's a really interesting, a legislative drafter. It's a really interesting job. And while I love my work, I also know that I have to make space for my research.
Mhm.
And I have to have the headspace when I'm not working to be able to do that kind of research. So for me, I have made a choice to not, for this period of my life, to not advance upward in the organization in such a way that work would take over so much of my mental headspace that when I'm not working, I'm thinking about work. So when I'm working, I want to think about work, and when I'm not working, I want to have that clear headspace.
Mm.
So that can be challenging for all of us, and I think that's something that one has to work on consistently, because it's very easy to let work bleed into our non-working life, and it takes a lot of discipline to, if something, and it's not even just work, it could be, you could be having say a personal problem with someone, there might be some tension in the relationship, like you're going home thinking about it. Well, how do we stop ourselves thinking about it, because we know that worrying and anxiety isn't going to fix anything, and it's about catching, and I think that again is part of the spiritual journey. It's catching our thoughts and arresting them before they spiral downwards. For me, I'm at a stage of my life now where I'm, I suppose, entering the second half of my life, if hopefully I'd have a long life, but I was very taken by Father Richard Rohr, his writings, and he talks about spiraling upwards, and the second half of life is an opportunity for us to really find out who we are and to let go of a lot of the patterns that we built up in the first half of our lives. So I find that really challenging and fascinating, and something that I want to go fully into.
Mhm.
And yeah, a big part of that is reflecting and recognizing our own patterns.
Mm. And I'm curious about your, like, your career path in the sense of, I know there might be people listening who are into a corporate career, so like, academic or something, like, it's like the, like, I'm going to say serious out of a better word, as opposed to maybe what we do on our spare time or what our passions are.
Mm.
And possibly thinking in terms of, um, it needs to be like a choice, either or. It's like either I get fully into, like, like it's the job and maybe I have no choice, I have to stay there, and meaning, like, there is no opportunities to feel fulfilled outside, outside of it. And that if I want to be fulfilled, then I need to find something else. And what I like about your story is that you managed to accommodate, to make both of them work. But has there any been a stage where, or is there a part of you that if you could, maybe if you could live fully from theater and your one woman show and researching Shakespeare, is that something that you would actually prefer to do, or you would love to do, or you would still never, that the career part, the legal part is also something that's very dear to you and that you wouldn't let it go?
I suppose with Shakespeare studies, the reality of Shakespeare studies is that it is a very, I suppose, particularly when you're studying something that hasn't been studied before and you're doing research, it's not something that generates income in and of itself. And you will find that the great researchers in the field, a lot of them would be lecturers
Mm.
as well. So the way research happens in the Oxfordian community, for people, say, not like me, I would have, funded my own trips to Italy and all of that because I'm doing it for myself. But at the scholarly level, there might be grants here and there. And for example, if you're a filmmaker, you might get a grant. And a lot of the grants would come from supporters of the movement, people who are convinced of the evidence for the Earl of Oxford. So for me, I don't really analyze, oh, well, what would I do if things were to change? I look at the reality that I have at the moment. And the reality I have at the moment is that I am deeply interested in research and writing, and I get a lot of joy out of it. I did learn from putting on my one woman show that it is a huge investment, both financially for me, because I have to pay rent up front and all of that. So what I've learned is that no matter what road you're going down, whether you're combining a job with your hobbies outside, or whether you're going fully down, where your hobbies are, etc., there are always going to be challenges and a huge load of admin when it comes to the financial generation side of things. So if I was to put on my one woman show and try and make it wash its own face and generate income, the amount of investment that would take, for me, I wonder, would that almost derail me from the happy place that I'm in, where I'm writing, I'm performing, there's no pressure to have to generate an income from it. Now, we don't know, but down the line, and I do think that because we are on a tipping point, the evidence for the Earl of Oxford is so incredible. I do think that there will be a point, possibly, hopefully within my lifetime, where, you know, we will wake up to the fact that we had the wrong person as the author of Shakespeare. And in that case, there could be a lot of reaching out to the pioneers in the field and people who have done research, and possibly there would be revenue generating possibilities, for example, writing books, etc. But for the moment, I just accept things the way they are, and every decision I make is a decision based on what is actually in front of me, rather than thinking, oh, I wish I did this or I wish I did that. Because I think a lot of it as well, Julie, comes from trusting the universe. So anytime I relax and trust and accept everything the way it is now, that's when the magic happens. And I know in myself, if I'm going to wish for something, an outcome or a possibility that's different from the way things are now, it almost like blocks it from happening. All the magic has happened when I fully accept and find the delight and joy in what I'm doing. And I mean that at every level. Whether it's my work, I find the joy in that, whether it's my research, whether it's my writing, finding the joy.
I love that. I nearly love, like, you know, as a feels like, you know, even a great conclusion is like finding joy wherever, joy and acceptance, and that's where the magic happens and allows other things to unfold and doors to open. I love it. If there was like is there something that maybe I haven't asked you, or that is dear to your heart that you would like to talk about?
There is, Julie. If any of the listeners are interested in further exploring the Shakespeare authorship question, there are some wonderful resources. And for example, there's an Oxfordian, Hank Whittemore, who's written a book, 100 Reasons Shakespeare is Oxford. And or it could be the other way around, 100 Reasons Oxford is Shakespeare. I can't remember which, but there are some fabulous resources online. So I would encourage your listeners who are interested to check out the De Vere Society website, to check out the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship website. And I had a wonderful friend who unfortunately, very sadly passed away last July, Alexander Waugh, Waugh. Alexander was the grandson of the great writer Evelyn Waugh, and Alexander was an incredible Oxfordian with the most high-level brain that I've ever come across in a human being. A genius, really. But he's got a wonderful YouTube channel. If you look up his name, Alexander Waugh, and what he does, for anyone who's interested in evidence, he goes through all the contemporaneous documents that were in Shakespeare's time in the 1590s, in the early 1600s, and he looks at all the hidden allusions to Edward de Vere being Shakespeare. So if anyone is interested in that kind of contemporaneous evidence and the esoteric side of things, because the Shakespeare was a great thinker and he was a hermetist. So Alexander talks about all of that, some fabulous videos on his YouTube channel.
So I'll make sure to, to write down, to communicate all of these references that you mentioned. But more personally, where can maybe people connect with you on that, and maybe like be made, people who would like me to see you on stage at some, stage.
Thanks, Julie.
How will we know when the next show happens?
The last time I performed the show was in September. I would like to put it on again in hopefully in Ireland. So I would look into maybe some of the summer festivals around the country. The show is A Rose by Any Other Name. It's 2 hours long and it's got an interval included in that. And if you want to follow me on Instagram, my Instagram handle is Shakespeare de Vere. So that's Shakespeare, SHAKESPEARE De Vere then, which is Devere. Actually, this is a picture, just to show you a picture
Yes, please do.
Of Edward de Vere. And here next to him we have, this is on the first folio of Shakespeare's plays. This is known as the Drushout engraving. And your viewers might be interested. You see the way the collar, it's almost like floating up off the doublet.
Yeah.
And people have often wondered, why is there such a strange drawing of Shakespeare? But all of this was done on purpose. And in 1911, a tailor realized that the back of the shoulder doublet is this is the back of this one. So it's not as if this is the front of the left shoulder and this is the front of the right. So you can see how strange it all looks. And all of that was to convey that the person is a fake person. So this is very much like a fake a fake image. So there's been a lot of analysis done on that as well.
Like another clue. There was
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, that was such an investigation. And so before I let you go, is there anything from the more like maybe spiritual angle or like, you know, like career spirituality advice? Is there any more that you would like, you know, to share with our audience, like the pearl of wisdom or pieces of
the pearl of wisdom is that when you feel things are really difficult and that you feel stuck, there is always a nout, there is always some tiny little thing on offer that will allow a glimmer. And if you follow that, it'll bring you to very magic places. And to know that if you're going through something that's really difficult and hard, that out of that will come extraordinary insight that you wouldn't have unless you had gone through the difficult period. So not to shirk from or get too down about difficult periods, to know that there's a richness that is working itself within you in those times.
Yeah, I like that. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and your incredible journey. I mean, like I was so excited and baffled when we started talking and revealing all these things about Shakespeare. I had no idea there was a controversy. Let me be like candid, and yes, learning to know you through your journey was amazing. Thank you so much, Rosemary, and I hope I'll have the opportunity to see you on stage soon. And I'll make sure to include all the links and references for all of our viewers to check. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julie. A pleasure.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody. And I shall see you soon for another career and spirituality conversation. Bye, everybody. Love you.